Romans 13:7 in the New International Version says this: give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. In view of our annual celebration of Veterans Day, in this episode of Kingdom and Culture, we will discuss to whom and how we owe a great deal of respect and honor, in particular to those men and women who have served and are serving in our United States Armed Forces for our entire country. Welcome to Kingdom and Culture, where truth and grace of the kingdom of God courageously intersect with the complexity of culture. Our guest today is U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral Doug Fears, retired. Admiral Fears served for a few years, well, quite a few years, and he'll clarify how many of those years in the U.S. Coast Guard, and his last few years on the White House staff as the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to the President of the United States. I don't know about you all out there in radio and podcast land, but that's pretty cool. Doug, thanks for being here. And I might just chime in, Admiral Doug, Admiral Fears, Rear Admiral, all around cool guy. You're here, and I just want to say thank you. Just so our podcast and radio audience can get to know you a little more as our honored veteran guest, can you just please tell us a little bit more about your journey from when you started in the U.S. Coast Guard up until your rise in rank as Admiral, and anything else you want to do to fill in the blank. So here you go. Floor is yours,
right.
Doug.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Man, we're so good to see you. I should probably start by saying a little bit about how you and I know each other.
Sure, go for it.
But Mike, for a season of time, was a pastor on the National Community Church staff on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and my wife, Kate, and I, and our boys were members of NCC for quite a long time. So we, between my sea duty tours of duty, I would come back to Washington for staff assignments in the Washington area, and Mike and I got to know each other back then.
True story. And I might chime in a little bit more background on that a little later, but go ahead.
Yeah, so good to see you. I enlisted in the Coast Guard, so I grew up on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is where I retired to. And if you know anything about the geography of the Maryland's Eastern Shore and the Chesapeake Bay, we're on the Chesapeake Bay proper, and so I grew up on the water. And so learned how to fish, learned how to sail, learned how to crab, learned how to oyster, all the things that are kind of features of being on the Chesapeake Bay. And so when I graduated from high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't college bound at the time. And so I just decided, hey, why don't I give the Coast Guard a go?
There you go.
And so that was 1982. And I enlisted in the Coast Guard. And my intention was to serve for 4 years and get out. Learn a trade. And at the time, if you know anything about the marine industry, marine electronics were things that were only found on commercial vessels. They weren't found on recreational vessels. So having a GPS or a chart plotter or a radio, all those things, they just didn't exist on recreational boats. And so I wanted to become an electronics technician and return to the Eastern Shore to work on marine electronics. And 40 years later, I retired. So I think it illustrates how bad of a planner that I am.
So you planned for 4 and ended up doing 4D.
That's correct, though.
That's awesome.
I ended up going to sea as a young seaman apprentice, and I fell in love with going to sea. And so I served in 8 different ships. I've sailed around the world. Was in Desert Storm. And done a lot in the counter-narcotics mission, but served in 8 ships, was a captain of 3 of them, and spent about 12 years of my life at sea.
I mean, there's so many questions that I want to unpack with that, but I guess I'll just start here. So as part of our U.S. Armed Forces, how would you say, in your experience in the Coast Guard, how the Coast Guard partners, you said with Desert Storm, but how did you partner with other branches of the military, like the Navy, I would imagine, and the Marines, for the common defense of the United States? How did that partnership work from our coast of the United States to beyond?
Yeah, so the Coast Guard naming convention, the Coast Guard implies that we're just along the American coast,
Right.
but we operate globally, and our
And
ships
that's probably
and
enlightening for a lot of our listeners to hear that
yeah,
you go beyond our shores.
yeah. So it's probably instructive to back up a little bit. In 1790, the Revenue Marine was created, which is now the modern day Coast Guard.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and so Alexander Hamilton cast a vision for the Coast Guard
Huh.
in the Federalist Papers. Actually,
Hold on.
Federalist,
Pause for a second. So all you lovers of Hamilton out there,
yeah,
Admiral Doug just gave you some historical insight that is totally relevant to your lives right now. So continue. Go ahead.
there
Sorry.
you go. So it's unique in that Hamilton cast a vision for the need
Yeah.
for a Revenue Marine for a Coast Guard back in Federalist 12.
Yeah.
And then he became George Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury. And as a cabinet secretary, he got Congress to appropriate money to build the first revenue cutters. And so
Wow.
not only did he cast the vision, he implemented the vision in two different roles in two seasons of his life.
Wow.
But the Revenue Marine got folded into a bunch of different maritime organizations in 1915, and Congress passed a law creating the United States Coast Guard. And so, what's
Wow.
unique about the Coast Guard is that the Coast Guard has law enforcement authority, and
Wow.
because of a provision in the law called posse comitatus, the U.S. military does not do law enforcement operations as a Title
Right.
10 function. And so the Coast Guard has never been in DOD.
Wow.
It's the Coast Guard was originally in Department of Treasury, and then in the Department of Transportation, and now in the Department of Homeland Security. And so they have Title 10 responsibilities and
Mm-hmm.
augment with DOD, but they also have Title 14, Title 50, and other authorities that allow them to do law enforcement, intelligence, and other things. And so the Coast Guard complements some of the things that the Navy does.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually was on an exchange assignment when I was in Desert Storm on a Navy guided missile cruiser. And so,
Wow.
whether you're driving a ship in the Navy or driving a ship in the Coast Guard, all the doctrine, the functions are very similar. What's different is the weaponry on the
Mm-hmm.
ships. You know, in a guided missile cruiser, you might have Strike Tomahawk missiles, you might have surface to air missiles. The Coast Guard doesn't have any missiles. It's got point defense capability, and their main battery, so to speak, is a boarding team that takes with it the law enforcement and Defense Department authorities that reside in the Coast Guard.
Wow. Would you say the Coast Guard then, in a different way, is, I guess you could say more, no pun intended, more navigatable in terms of the fact that you have that coastal duty worldwide and on within the domestic United States, but you have that law enforcement component that allows you to have a little more versatility? I don't know. Is that what I'm picking up here?
Yeah, the Coast Guard's a bit of a Swiss Army knife,
Yeah.
to
That's a good way of putting it.
to
Yeah.
use that metaphor. But we
Yeah.
can operate anywhere within the territorial waters of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
which goes out to 12 nautical miles, and then we can operate around the world anywhere on the high seas. And the high
Wow.
seas go from the territorial waters of one nation to the territorial waters of another nation. So
Wow.
12 miles off the African coast is African territorial seas. Outside of 12 miles is the high
Yep.
seas. So we can operate in the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Mediterranean, the Arabian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, wherever there's a problem that's wet and in the interest of the United States,
Ha.
the Coast Guard can generally operate.
Wow. So yeah, just whatever helps you fulfill your mission is where you are able to operate within legal bounds. That
That's right.
I'm getting some insight here that I'm surprised I'm sorry I never really asked you when we hung out in other times, but I'm glad to
Yeah.
get it here. Um,
So
so
let me tell you a quick funny
yeah,
story. So
go for it.
one of my Navy buddies from Desert Storm went on to command a minesweeper, and I was executive officer on a Coast Guard medium endurance cutter at home ported in Key West, Florida, and he was pulling his ship into Key West, and so I sent him an email, and I said, well, why don't you come over for lunch in our wardroom? And I'll take you for the tour of the ship. And so he said, that sounds great. So we caught up over lunch, and I'm walking him around my ship. And at one point in the tour, he stops and he looks at me kind of in disbelief. And he goes, this is like a real ship. And I thought, man, that's insulting.
That's
Like,
offensive.
yeah, but it was like he had never been on a Coast Guard ship before, and so Coast Guard ships are designed to the same naval architecture standards as Navy ships are, and
Yeah.
so there's, it's funny that way.
Yeah, no, I like that analogy. It's like, no, actually, yes, it floats and we have guns. So
That's it.
that's awesome. So how would you say, you kind of touched on it a little bit, how would you say you personally came to that conclusion? I mean, you kind of touched on it, that you're like, well, I don't know what else to do with my life. I think I'll try the Coast Guard because I like the ocean and things. But I would like to tie in, where do you see God's hand threading your journey in those decisions? Since you said it at first, you were like trying to figure things out spiritually, but where do you see God's call in your life, where an intent of 4 years to serve and gain a trade then became 40 years to where you became an admiral in one of the oldest military branches in American history here, and then served in the White House as an advisor to the President of the United States? I'd say there's a lot between there that led to that capstone, if you will, of your career, for lack of better description. Where do you see God's hand in all of that?
All over.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, when I was 18 years old, I was a Christian, but I wasn't walking that closely with the Lord.
Okay.
And so I take a lot of those things, as our buddy Pastor Mark Batterson is fond of saying. There are these moments that are kind of spiritaneous.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of me like getting into the stuff that I was doing, I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought, this is a logical next step. I'll take it and see where it goes. And he introduced me to other people, other adult men, principally, that were Christians, that were Coast Guardsmen, and he just put them in my path. And so I served in one ship that's now a floating museum in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. The ship had actually been in the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was in Honolulu Harbor when the Japanese attacked, survived, had this wonderful storied history. And so I was a seaman apprentice on this ship. And when you're a young enlisted person on a ship, you do what's called mess cooking for a season.
Okay.
And that means you clean up the galley and you help the cooks do all the things so that the crew gets fed.
Right.
And so I was put in the wardroom, which is where the officers dine. And so I was a wardroom mess cook. And so I was around all of the officers in that ship. And I got to serve them meals and clean up after them and those sorts of things. And a couple of them had cornered me and said, hey, Fears, you need to think about going to the Coast Guard Academy. And my big brother is a very smart guy, and he had gone to the Naval Academy. And I thought, I'm not my big brother. Like, I don't know that this is for me.
Yeah.
And so I had one guy in particular who was an ensign at the time. And he insisted that I take my SATs. He arranged for me to take my SATs, and then he poked me over the course of a couple of assignments to apply to the Coast Guard Academy. I ended up going to the Coast Guard Academy and got my commission. Then when I retired in 2022, he had retired 2 years before me as a vice admiral. And I sent him an email. Actually, I think I texted him and I said, hey, Fred, would you be willing to be a guest speaker at my retirement ceremony? And so I got to begin my career and end my career with this one guy in particular who's like a big brother to me.
Yeah. Wow.
But those were like the fingerprints of God. And even so we did my retirement ceremony. I don't know if you know this, Mike, but we did it at NCC, and we did it at the Capitol Turnaround.
Yeah, I did know that because Pastor Joel Schmidgall he attended and was there. So yeah, he told me about that.
So Pastor Mark opened with a prayer at the beginning of the ceremony, and then Pastor Joel closed with a prayer at the end of the ceremony.
Wow.
And Pastor Mark prayed at one point because it was 40 years to the day that I retired.
Wow.
And so, Mark well enough to know that he loves that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And there's no accident in that.
Yeah.
Well, there's
he prayed. It was 40 years to the day, and he said something to the effect of, and I'm not saying it was in the desert, making a reference
To Moses.
to Moses and the Jews
Right.
wandering for 40 years. But
You wandered on the seas instead.
I wandered on the seas. Yeah. But
Wow.
as I got more senior, back to your question, as I got more senior,
Yeah.
assignments start coming through Washington, D.C.
Yep.
In these senior staff assignments. And so, it's by the grace of God that I got to do what I did, but I worked in the House of Representatives. I worked in Coast Guard headquarters. I worked with the Office of Management and Budget. I worked on the National Security Council staff a couple times. Was an advisor to the president, was in a think tank. And so I would come to DC and do these things, and then I would go back out for sea duty. So I went to sea at every pay grade along the way,
Wow.
and it's just what happened.
And you kept your feet wet while also doing some pretty high level work in our nation's capital. It's almost like you're the perfect seaman
Yeah.
in that regard. And for those just joining us on radio or podcasts, we're with Admiral Doug Fears, retired from the U.S. Coast Guard, who also served in the White House as advisor to the president for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. Pretty awesome accomplishments. And as he just mentioned, serving in all these administrative duties in the House of Representatives. And what a great story, Doug. I mean, wow. God is, I've always joked around that I'm like the Forrest Gump of pastors. I don't know how I ended up in Washington, D.C., but I met the president again. It's like you're meeting the president and serving in these places. And it sounds like from how you started, it's just you became the Forrest. I don't mean to demean you. You're an admiral in the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm gonna honor you because you need that. But wow, that God put you in these places.
Yeah.
To me, it's like you can see God's divine hand, sovereign work in your life. And no doubt you probably had a grandma, a mom, and some others praying for you
Oh,
along
no
the way.
doubt. Yeah. Like every good mother or grandmother, you're always,
Yes,
especially if you have boys, you're
absolutely.
on your knees hard praying for them. But
Absolutely.
my mom, who's now 86,
Mm,
prays for me all the time, man.
come on.
She is like faithful, and my pastors too. I mean,
Yeah,
I know you prayed for me when we were in the same congregation.
absolutely.
When I was working at the White House, one of the things that comes along with working in the West Wing is you get privileges in the White House mess.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. Like, what was that experience like going from, being on the open seas and doing all these other wonderful things? Now you're in the White House advising the president, not of a company, but of the United States of America. I don't know if people pick that up yet, but that's a big deal. That's a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah, I tried to be faithful. I started my day. I had a Bible on my desk. I would start my day in the Proverbs, and I like when
Yeah.
I've been in these really challenging seasons of life. One of my go-tos is I just switch to the Proverbs and I just read a
Hmm.
proverb a day,
Come on.
and that tends to keep me grounded.
Yeah.
And then I also would bring in I brought in Pastor Mark and Pastor Joel. They'd
Yep.
come in and have lunch with me or breakfast with me and pray with me in my
So
office. And
good.
Dick Foth actually came in a couple of times,
Wonderful.
and so I had a lot of folks praying for us, and we
Yeah.
had. The work was hard. The hours were long. I mean, there's a
Sure.
saying about parenting that the days are long, but the years are short.
Yeah.
The same thing applies to working at the White House when you're working 7 days a week and 18
Hmm.
hours a day. And God still gave us the margin we needed. Kate and I led a small group while I was the
Mm.
Homeland Security advisor of the president. And I would many times have to go to work. I'd go to church on Sunday mornings if I
Yep.
could, and I did most of the time.
Hmm.
And then I would get home and go, honey, I got to go to work for a bit and do some things. And then I'd do
Hmm.
that, and we'd come home and we'd host a small group on parenting with other families that you know from
Yeah.
NCC
Yeah.
every Sunday. And it was
Wow.
we prioritized it, and it was a meaningful part of our lives. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good
Well,
season.
so yeah, and as a veteran, you know, having served, it sounds like you found that life rhythm both in your duties, but also now that have carried into retired life, which you're not dead. Obviously, you're still doing
Mhm.
work. You're traveling the nation and still speaking. And here you are in our podcast, which again, thank you for being here. Um, uh, and maybe this is a good segue into some other things you've done. You were recently on a podcast with Kirsten Lindquist about burnout to biohacking around fasting and breath work and faith. While we don't have time to go deep into that, it seems like this has been a pretty big deal to you with this healthy living, both spiritually with your faith in Jesus, but also just in general with your body. And what is that all about? Post U.S. Coast Guard,
Yeah.
post White House, sounds like it's something that's pretty important to you.
Yeah. So I left the White House in 2019. I was
Okay.
metabolically unhealthy when I left.
Okay.
I had been for years, I was in good shape. I was a marathoner early on, and I just gradually, standard American diet, having kids and prioritizing kids and family over yourself,
Yeah.
uh, increasingly larger responsibilities, deployed at sea, a lot of pressure. And
Yeah.
so, and as those professional responsibilities grow, managing stress is kind of a thing. And I don't know that I
Yeah.
did it particularly well.
Okay.
And then I hit a wall in 2019, and I had brain fog, I had low back pains, I had hip pains, general fatigue. I mean, I was still fully functional,
Sure.
but I had to push myself harder to do what I needed to do. And I was working 7 days a week when I was at the White
Yeah.
House, and so I didn't observe the Sabbath, which is really important to be able to do. And so
Yeah.
I started searching on the internet, and I found a doctor who was talking about intermittent fasting and the value of fasting. And by the
Mm.
way, like you and I didn't talk about this, Mike, um, but I'm 3.5 days water fasted right now and black coffee.
Wow.
But when your body gets into a fasted state, it enters this phase called autophagy in biology, and it's
Uh-huh.
where your body begins to eat fat instead of sugar, and it also eats toxins that are
Oh,
fat
good.
soluble. And so there's a
So you've just been
therapeutic.
drinking water and coffee the last 3 days.
3.5. Yep, yep.
Three
I'm
and a
gonna
half. Wow.
I'm gonna break my fast probably in about an hour.
All
Um,
right.
but I feel great. I have high
Yeah.
energy. Your body begins to produce more ketones from your liver.
Yeah.
Ketones are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and serve as a fuel for your brain. And so, I said at the beginning of, actually, I said it towards the end of the podcast, but she pulled it up. Their production team pulled it up to the intro
Uh-huh.
of the podcast. But I told Kate a long time ago as I began to learn all this stuff. And at this point, I've read about 150 books on cellular healing, detox, biohacking, those sorts of things. But
Yeah.
um, if I were ever diagnosed with cancer, the very first thing I would do is fast for anywhere from 20 to 40 days. Just
Wow.
do a water fast, because your body goes after your God designed our bodies to heal itself. And so
Yeah.
what you have to do is remove the barriers to healing, which are all
Mm-hmm.
the toxins in our environment.
Yep.
And then you have to enable your body to do what God designed it to do. And so, if you remember back to biology, there's a thing called a senescent cell. It's a broken or dead cell.
Yeah.
Uh, Cell senescence turns into cancer sometimes. And
Mm.
so cancer cells they fuel themselves off sugar. So if you ever had cancer, you don't want any sugar in your diet. But if you turn your body and trigger autophagy through fasting onto your cancer, then I've got a friend of mine whose wife had breast cancer. And instead of the normal cancer treatment, she fasted for 27 days, went back to the doctor. They couldn't find the cancer cells.
Wow.
So
Praise God.
the tumor was gone. And so it's become a part of who I am. And
Yeah.
I wish I would have known this 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, now you're using your platform with all that great knowledge of the open seas and serving, and now you get to be a living example of how you can still be healthy even after all that work. And we only have a few minutes left, and for those that are listening, again, we have Admiral Doug Fears here with us, a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard. And, maybe it's veterans that are listening and they need to get in that place of health, both spiritually and physically. And I hope what you've been able to share. You can actually follow Doug, and Doug, you can help me out with this on Instagram. I love your handle, Cutter Daddy Dog. That's Cutter like the ship, Cutter, Daddy, Daddy, Dog, Dawg. That's just like your cool status right there. So that's on
Yeah.
Instagram if you want to follow Doug and hear more about what he just said. But in our last couple of minutes, what word of encouragement do you want to leave with your fellow veterans and their families? And then what word of advice would you give to young aspiring future veterans of our U.S. Armed Forces, whether they are going into the Army, the Marines, the Navy, Air Force, Space Force, or U.S. Coast Guard?
Yeah.
So that's kind of two-part there.
Yeah, first of all, I'd say I salute all the veterans that are out there listening, and those who aren't listening. But
Yeah.
it's a calling and it's a
Yeah.
sacrifice. It's honorable. It's purpose driven, and
Yeah.
all those things are very, very meaningful. And so, and there's a life after service. I've
That's
really
good.
enjoyed the almost 3 years that I've been retired. Um, because I've just shifted into a new chapter and I'm doing new things, and that's all a
Yeah.
lot of fun. But I am a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and he delivered a speech to the
Ditto.
King's College in the late 1940s called The Inner Ring. And in that speech, and I encourage you to read it, Google C.S. Lewis, The Inner Ring. It's kind of thick academic, British English.
Sure.
And so in it, he cautions these college seniors against pursuing the inner ring. And it's like getting inside the inner ring is a perpetual feature, he argues. So the inner ring is designed to keep you out. And those who pursue getting in the inner ring discover once they're in it that there's another inner ring inside the inner ring.
Wow.
And so this perpetual feature attracts people to do things that maybe aren't as honorable or important in the pursuit of being in the inner ring. Instead, Lewis argues that you should focus on becoming a sound craftsman. And by becoming a sound craftsman, you find yourself in an inner ring that you didn't seek to belong to, and that's an inner ring of other sound craftsmen. And
Wow.
there are all these virtuous features inside the inner ring of sound craftsmen, like craftsmanship, like friendship, like honor and duty, and all these other things that are important. And so, to the young veterans that are out there that are pursuing their vocation, my advice to you would be, as my advice to myself was, pursue becoming a sound craftsman, and then other people are attracted to you because you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
And so that's a great way to spend life. I mean, I didn't seek to become the Homeland Security Advisor to the president. I was sought after.
Yeah.
And so, I served, I hope, with distinction and honor. And so my job, your job at the core, is to become a sound craftsman and to follow our Lord Jesus. Right.
Amen.
And then God will figure the rest of it out. You just got to be
Amen.
obedient. And as our buddy Pastor Mark likes to say, like long obedience in the same direction. And he'll direct your path.
Amen. Well, Doug, from my vantage point, you have served our nation honorably for 40 plus years. You continue to do so in your craftsmanship even now. And I want to thank you again for joining us on Kingdom and Culture. And I just want to say a happy Veterans Day to all those who have served and are serving. And again, a special thanks to you, Admiral Doug Fears. God bless you. And we'll see you next time on Kingdom and Culture. Yep.